What's up? Welcome to the virtual roundtable. I'm glad to have you guys with us today. We've got Thom Rainer in the house with us this morning, this afternoon, wherever you're watching us from, wherever you're joining us. We're glad that you're with us today. I'm going to kick it off to our president, our founder, the one and only Mr. Josh Tice. Josh, take it from here.
Hey guys, good to see everybody today. We're gonna have a great conversation with Dr. Thom Rainer. Thom, to you and me and our friend, we're glad he's here. It's been a great month in the month of August. Some incredible content with some incredible leaders. Dr. Gary Chapman last week was amazing and learning how the 5 love languages really relate to pastoral ministry. That was really, really helpful. And then before with Kurt Skelly, fascinating. And then next week, Mark Miller will be with us talking about leadership. And Jace's going to tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. But welcome to each and every one of you. We love you. We're glad you're here. We know that you're in the midst of fall campaign kickoff. And if you're like Las Vegas, school is now starting in the middle of the summer. So maybe your back to school stuff has been a little thrown off kilter as ours has, but people are starting to come back to church. And as they do, church is beginning to get really busy for a lot of you. And so I'm glad that you took this hour to take away. And I don't often get a chance to say this again. Thank you for being part of the official membership of the Idea Network. Your support, your monthly support really does help not only you get great content and access to wonderful leaders like Dr. Rainer, but also the opportunity of really supporting the future of what this network is and what it's becoming. So, man, we are grateful for each and every one of you. We are thankful for our pal, Robbie Green, who's going to be hosting the Idea Summit in Dallas coming up here in January of 2023. So much excitement about that. Robbie, tell us about 2 things you're most excited about the upcoming summit in Dallas, and then open us up in a word of prayer.
Well, our team has been working hard for months getting ready, and I just know everybody's going to have a great time. Having everybody here, Josh, we love being in Vegas, but having a campus that's a little bit bigger and having the space, that's going to be awesome. We have a lot of breakout space and a lot of things that will really, I think, facilitate the crowd. And then just seeing and hearing what's going to be done for the kids and the teenagers. I'm really excited about that. I think it is going to be an amazing family event. And I hope everybody get the word out, because Kylie and everybody involved has just done an amazing job. And we're so excited about what's going to happen here soon. Let's open in prayer. Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this today. Lord, thank you for Thom Rainer and all that he has meant to so many of us, and how we've been able to learn and glean from his wisdom, his experience. Lord, I thank you for each person that's here, that's a part of the network, and that's here in attendance today, for those that could not be here today. And then, Lord, we also want to remember Idea Night tonight. And Lord, we pray that as many locations across the country are having this event, I pray that it would be a great time of fellowship, of learning, and a collaborative effort to advance the kingdom of God. And we'll thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, Josh. I'm going to switch over to gallery view. Robbie just said it, but how many of you are planning to go to Idea Night somewhere tonight? Let me see your hands. We've got most of you on here. Good. Glad to see that. There's an Idea Night. Josh, your hand better be up. But we've got a good Idea Night, and guys coming from all over the place to different locations. Make sure you post about that. We'll have a time next week to share some testimonials, some feedback on what you guys think of the event tonight. But hopefully, if there's one near you, you're able to make it. One other plug I want to give before I let Josh introduce Dr. Rainer with us today. August has been awesome. Josh has talked about who we've had in August. All of our virtual roundtables are available. You go to our Facebook page, you can click the link, the replay link. All of those are still on YouTube. Make sure that you get those. If you missed a week and you're not able to be with us live, every Wednesday, we try and post that on there. Every Friday, we send out the email. And what that's going to do is it's going to have content that we give to you guys, as well as the link of how to access that. So make sure if you do miss a week, you're not able to be with us live, you go back, watch the replay, and you'll be glad that you did. Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you to give it to Dr. Rainer today. We're glad he's with us.
As stated before, yes, Dr. Thom Rainer is with us. Dr. Thom Rainer has been an influence in my life, in your life. for many years. If you haven't read each of his books, you'll have the opportunity to pick them up anytime you'd like on Amazon. Of course, Simple Church, incredibly helpful, but his most recent books like Post-Pandemic Church have been incredibly helpful to so many. But let's all be honest today. Let's be real about this. I mean, is it not the Church Revitalization Checklist by his son Sam that is the best book of all the Rainers at this point? Because it's a fantastic book, and it's one that I've given out to friends already. You got to pick up a copy of Sam's book, Church Revitalization Checklist, and you can pick that up on Amazon as well, and Audible. Dr. Thom Rainer, you are a friend of the network, and we care for you, and we're thankful for you. Take us off and teach us today.
Thanks, Josh. I mean, good gravy train, promoting my son like that while I'm here. I'll be able to handle it one way or the other. I will talk about something that is very pragmatic, extremely practical. Just the thought of following Gary Chapman after having him there. And then here comes Rainer talking about reaching new guests. And yeah, Gary Chapman has the 5 love languages, probably, well, one of the best-selling books of all time in Christian history. And here's Rainer talking about what do you do with guests. And the first thing that happens is the illustrious leader, Josh, starts giving me a hard time that my son Sam's book is better than mine. I feel so welcome. And by the way, even though you don't see me that often, I am a member of the network. Yes. So not only have you insulted the guest, you've insulted one of. But I'm here because you want me to be here. So thank you so much. Has anything changed in the post-quarantine era in terms of reaching new guests? Yes. Has anything remained the same? Yes. Let's talk about some of both so that we can begin to unpack this a little bit. So let's talk about effective ways of reaching new guests. First thing I want to talk about is, where is the funnel today? Funnel may seem like a secular word, a marketing word, and I don't mean for it to be something that we cannot use in a sanctified way. But what are we talking about when we talk about a funnel? It talks about the top of the funnel being the great number of people who could potentially visit our church, either through online or in person, most of the time in person. So we start at the top of the funnel. And then obviously, as you go down the funnel, it gets more narrow. And finally, you get to the end of the funnel and it's to a point. And we're going to talk about that for just a moment before we look at some of the other issues about effective ways of reaching new guests, because the funnel, hear this well, the funnel has changed since the pandemic. So this is one of those things you need to pay attention to, even if you're going to mute yourself and read your emails or something like that while I'm talking. This is the one thing that I would have you just kind of hold on to for just a minute. What is the funnel today? What has the funnel been in the past? Typically, the funnel in the past, if you go back before many of you were born, the funnel was small groups or Sunday school. And then if you go up to the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, the funnel was the worship service. That's where it began. That was the first point of entry. Now the funnel has changed significantly. The funnel now begins with just the website. And I'm going and guests who are coming to churches have visited your website before they ever walked onto your campus. Now, there are a lot of implications about that. That in itself may not be a surprise to you, but I want to unpack it a little bit more in just a minute. But you've got a great number of people who have now come into your church that know a lot about you, at least from the website before they get there. So the question is, what are they seeing on the website? I think I mentioned this to this group in the past, that if you were to put in your church's URL, your church's web site, and you were to just hit it on a smartphone, the key things you need to look at is the worship time? Are the worship times there? And is the physical address there? Without scrolling at all. That is just one of the keys. Here is what we're finding. Guests that are totally unchurched, or if they have moved from another town, they haven't found a church home, They are going to their smartphones and they are looking at your website. And the first thing that they want to see is what is your physical address, so they can put it in the GPS. And then they want to look at the worship times without scrolling. And you're going to lose about 1/3 of them if you don't have both of those on your smartphone when you open it. So I hope you heard what I just said. You're going to lose 1/3 of the top of the funnel if you don't have those two items on your homepage when you open your smartphone. I'm talking about the mobile view more than I am the computer or Mac or view. I'm talking about the mobile view. You will lose as many as 1/3 because they're going to be uninterested. They're going to swipe away. They may go to look at another church, or they may not look at church at all. So we talk about things that might be important. Think about that for just a moment. Let's presume that the top of your funnel in your community is 200 people. It could be 2,000, it could be 20 people, but it's 200 people. Over the course of a year, you're going to lose 60 of those people if you don't have that one item at the top of the funnel. And if they are all lost people, those 200, you're going to lose the opportunity to share the gospel to 60 people, 30% of 200. So just hear that very well, how important the top of the funnel is. We can't even begin to talk about guest issues until we talk about getting the guests interested in coming to us. So the top of the funnel is the website. The second part of the funnel is the streaming sermon or the streaming service. Not necessarily live, but it's there. It's either a sermon in of itself or it's the entire service. Almost half of everybody who walks in through your door is now checking the entire worship service. If it's sermon only, obviously that's what they're seeing and hearing. But if it's the worship service, they're watching it in its entirety. What are they looking for? They're looking at the sermon and the pastor, but they're also looking to see how people are dressed. They're looking to see the formality or informality, wherever their preference may be. They are checking out your church before they even walk in the door. Now, I can nerd out on this stuff. So don't hear me as saying that this is the most important thing in the world. The gospel is the most important thing. The authority of scripture is the most important thing. The exclusivity of salvation through Christ. Those are the important things. So I don't want to nerd out on this too much, but I want you to hear very clearly, if you're going to see people come to your church where they can hear the gospel, where they can get connected with believers in Christ, then you need to have these things in line, going well at the top of your funnel. So do you have a website that has your address, physical address for the GPS, and your service time or times? Do you have a place where they can watch a service, or at the very least watch or listen to a sermon? That's what's going to happen before about half of them arrive. They're going to watch both of those. Now, most of them are going to watch the website. About 9 out of 10 are going to look at the website, but about half will also watch almost a complete service. Then what happens to the funnel? Then they show up. You know, what is important about when they show up for that first time? Most churches do not really begin to realize two things that, again, incredibly practical, pragmatic, that should be on this list, but how the signage is laid out externally. And we're talking about well before you get to the building. And do you have greeters in your parking lot? Now, that is something most churches do not have. Yours may. I don't want to presume that you do not, but the entire sense of cultural friendliness does not begin when they walk in the door. It begins when they drive onto your campus. Are they seeing signage? Do they have people in the parking lot who are being friendly, not being fake friendly, but who are being friendly? So these are some of the things that we are seeing post-pandemic that have a heightened level of importance. There's so many other areas that we could cover, like the cleanliness and how the pandemic has affected that, space, distance, all of those things. But I wanted to give you those as a beginning point. Now, there are a couple of things that I want to share with you that I think may be helpful as tools for you. And I have a lot of points here, and I know in 20 to 25 minutes, I'm not going to even try to cover all of them. And so I want to make sure I get some of the highlights here. This was important. This issue was important pre-pandemic. It is increasingly important today. What is this issue? And it is the issue of having someone visit your church who has never been and giving you a report. We are now suggesting to pastors that they do a semi-annual secret guest visit. They don't do it, obviously, someone else does it for them. And that in one of those 6-month periods, it would be an unchurched person, non-believer. And the other one, it would be a person who is familiar with church, probably a member of a church, but who has never been to your church. This particular exercise is opening more eyes than I ever would have imagined. I'm headed to Texas in about 3 days. And one of the things I'm going to be talking to the church where we did a consultation is nobody at all could understand your facility. Nobody at all could understand where to go. People talked about how your church was friendly to one another. Every church thinks they're the friendliest church in town because the members are to each other. But I'll have to be talking to this church about how their welcome team has to break out of its holy huddles, even during college football season. And that's as much as I want to talk about. So the importance of having a secret guest to come to your church, evaluate, and give you a report. How do you do that? Well, a lot of churches are doing it very simple. If there's a coffee shop, a local coffee shop, they go and get a $25 gift card and just ask someone, and someone in the church knows someone who's not a believer, coworker or whatever, and say, hey, will you do me a favor? We're doing an assessment of our church. Would you take this survey and just come to our church on Sunday, and just as a favor to me, as a friend, and here's some of the things. I'm going to give you a form to just let you know what you might be seeing and what you need to look for. So anybody should be able to find. I mean, if you have an entire staff and church members who do not know people who are not believers, well, that is a problem in itself. But the reality of it is many of your church members work with them. And so they need to have this particular form so that this person who's never been to a church, or maybe rarely been to a church, will know what to look for. Now, to make it easy for you, we are sending you that form. Even before we met, my office sent to Jason this particular form, a secret guest survey. So you will be getting that survey. If Jason is effective, this will be a test of the effectiveness and the efficiency of Jason. If Jason is effective and efficient, you will get a secret guest survey form via email. And if he's really effective, you will get it before the millennium ends in 3,000. So Jason's going to be sending that to you, and you will have that. Hear me well. We think we know what our church is like. We leaders, we don't. The people who see our church the clearest are the people who have not been there before. They are seeing things for the first time. I would encourage you, an effective way of reaching you guests, that you do this twice a year. Once with an unchurched person, once with a believer who has never been to your church. Same form, same process. And when it's over, if you want to, invite them to lunch to ask them what they found out, maybe talk to them the next day, do it whatever way is the easiest for you, and take that information and share it with your staff or leadership team or deacons or elders or whatever the case may be. Share it with them, and maybe even share it with the entire church if there's an appropriate venue to do so. So then the critical importance of people seeing your church with first-time guest eyes. A similar thing that I would encourage your leadership to do, you don't have to get an outsider for this, is to do a facility audit. When we at Church Answers did a consultation a few years ago at Southern Hills, we did a facility audit. I am not a contractor. I am not an architect. I'm not a builder. I have not yet figured out which end of a hammer to use. I don't know much about manual labor, but I do know this. if you have a checklist of things to look for, I can see things. I am not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but I can see things when we begin to go through a facility. I would encourage you, and maybe take 2 or 3 key leaders with you, walk through the church and look at certain things that you need to be viewing from a facility point of view, particularly through the eyes of guests, particularly through the eyes of guests. Where do you get one of these? Well, guess what? Jason has one of those for you too. So Jason is not only going to be sending you a secret guest checklist, he will also be sending you a facility audit. And we start talking about effective ways of reaching new guests. Hey, if you can get these 2 things done, you have jumped light years ahead of where most churches are today. So we're going to provide all of you those 2 forms. And I really hope it does not just sit in your inbox or your trash digitally. I hope it will be something that you can use in such a way that you can be friendlier to guests. I did mention the critical importance of signage. I don't want to jump beyond that too much, but when you're doing your facility audit, it is good to have someone with first-time eyes looking at your signage to see if it really makes sense. And while I don't want to make a statement of sexism in this regard, I will say anecdotally, we have found that it has been much more effective to have a female to look at the signage rather than a male. I don't know if that is empirically verifiable, but as many consultations as we have done, especially on signage, we have found that for some reason, females have a keener awareness of the signage and what it means intuitively than males do. I cannot prove it, but just to give you that little bit of information. The signage that we see in our churches, quite frankly, we see it every week. We're used to it. We're accustomed to it, whether it's signage outside in the parking lot or to the entrance or to the front area. What is the number one most complained about thing about signage among guests? They don't know where to enter the front door. It may seem amazing to you, but the number one irritant that we hear among guests is that they do not know where to find the front door. That's another guest issue. Again, this is not 5 love languages. This is 5 practical matters, or 6 or 7, however the case may be. But I hope it can be something that will have an eternal importance. Let me go over one more, and then we'll see what kind of questions that we have. Oh, by the way, the parking lot, I do think, if at all able, get parking lot greeters. I don't know if I told y'all this story, and if I'm being redundant, please forgive me because I've spoken to you a few times. But I got a parking lot greeter in my first church when I was a pastor, way back, probably late 1700s, and he was a brand new Christian. I had the opportunity to share the gospel with him, and he became a believer. But he came from a rough background, and he asked me, what's the first thing I do? Well, I got him in the Bible. I got him coming to worship services. I got him in a Sunday school class. He said, but, can I serve in any way? So we didn't have any greeters in this little church in Southern Indiana. So I made him our lone parking lot greeter. And I said, Steve, I want you to be our outside greeter. He said, what does that do? I said, you just be yourself. Just greet people. Just be friendly. And as they come in, first Sunday, guests come into the worship service and they have wide-eyed looks, and they come up to me. I've never met them before, and I welcomed them, and I said, well, we met Steve outside, and I could tell there was a little bit of hesitation, maybe a little bit of shock in their voice. I found out that Steve had not removed some of the profanity of his previous life, and he was greeting people. And I will just give the mild part, and if you'll please forgive me for a bit of profanity. He was greeting people coming in and saying, how the hell are y'all doing? And that was the mildest thing that Steve was doing. So Steve and I had to have a lesson in what is profanity, because he didn't know what it was, and then how to remove it from his vocabulary. Only unfortunate thing, when he gave his testimony a few weeks later, he said the pastor was teaching him all about profanity. And I had to give a little bit of correction on what he meant by the pastor teaching him about profanity. So get outside greeters, get men and women who will greet them when they first come up. Again, our church was at that time a very small church. Steve was probably the only person I could find to do it because he didn't know any better. But get outside greeters. One more thing, and then I got a list here. I'm not going to take time to go down all of them. Try to understand what is a foreign language to a guest. If somebody walks in that has no idea about your church or about Christianity, what are some things that you are saying that they may not understand at all? And I'm not necessarily talking about the sermon. And I'm not suggesting that you don't talk about regeneration or sanctification, although it'd be good to explain those words. I'm just simply saying, in your public and private conversation with guests, are you saying things that guests would not understand? The greatest offense is usually acronyms that the church members understand that the guests do not. Just something as simple as that. If you're using an acronym, it is a great likelihood that most of the guests will not have a clue what you're saying. So just a little bit of counsel on effective ways of reaching new guests. Don't speak in a foreign language to them. Don't speak in a language of words that they don't know, acronyms with letters that they don't understand. So my time here is supposed to be about 20 to 25 minutes, and I've just about to edge over that. I've got a few other things I could say, but I'm going to hold off for just a moment and stop at the bottom of the hour and see how I might address some issues on guest friendliness or reaching new guests that might be most helpful to you in the Idea Network.
And that was fast. That just went by so fast to me. I don't know if any of you guys felt that way too, but yeah, let's take some
That's
questions.
because you were on the spot, Jason, and you had to make sure that you had gotten an email from Jana and that you were ready to send out those 2 inventories that we provided you. And you
Yes,
felt
sir.
you felt the tension, and so therefore you had to watch. You didn't have time to watch the clock. So
That's true. That's true.
And I just checked my email and I already got it from Jason. So
Yep.
There you go. Now that is
Wow.
efficiency, effectiveness. I'm impressed, Jason. I'll stay on the screen for a little while longer just because you've impressed me so much.
Wow, that means a lot to me. Thank you both.
I can
Any
tell
questions?
you're whelmed. I can tell.
Any questions you guys have got for Dr. Rayner? I appreciate that talk. I could have listened to that all day. We're so numb. We're so deaf to a lot of the things that first-time guests see, and that's so important. What other questions do you guys have that we can ask him? Yeah, I see you, Tony. Go ahead.
Hey, we love the idea of outside greeters, but when it gets cold being up north, how do you create that atmosphere or put people out there when they're just freezing? And so every year when it gets winter time, January, February, March, it just gets difficult. Any suggestions or ideas?
Yeah, stay warm. That's my suggestion idea. Your guests are not going to expect your people to be standing out in the cold. They will expect them to have a quick door open for them. They'll expect them to say, someone to say, come into the warmth. But if you have 60, 70, 80, 90 days where it is unbearably cold outside, there's no reason why you have to have your outside greeters. Look, if you have outside greeters 9 months of the year, you're way ahead of the curve. So do those when you can. Same thing with heavy pouring rain. Greeters typically have an arsenal of big umbrellas, and they take them out to the car when the doors open. They help people to come in if they're willing. Some people freak out when they see someone coming toward them with an umbrella, so you have to use discernment on that. But I wouldn't worry about being uncomfortable. Your guest is going to want to get in as quickly as possible and probably not be slowed down by somebody waving to them or chatting with them.
Tony, we
Where do you
understand
live,
that it
Tony?
got down to 60 in Dallas one time in January last year. It was horrible.
Tony, where do you live?
We are in Columbus, Ohio. So it's not as bad as some areas like Chicago and stuff like that, but it still gets cold and pretty
It
lot of
can.
snow and stuff like that.
It can. Absolutely.
Good question. Who's next? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I just had a question about, so I feel like sometimes when the guest comes in, I feel like I want to meet them and, I want to connect with them. And sometimes we have multiple guests and I almost feel like, man, if I don't get to connect with them at the end of the service, I feel like they haven't got the full experience, or at least I haven't got a vibe from them that would help me or encourage me to continue to sort of pursue them or know in which way to pursue them. Maybe it's coffee, maybe they say, hey, we're just looking for a church or whatever. So I guess I was going to ask, in the research that you guys done, how important or not important it is for a guest to connect with the senior pastor?
It is important. It is undoubtedly important. I won't necessarily make it a research issue, Steve, because I don't have hard data on it. But I can tell you from a consultative point of view, it is important. There are a couple of ways you can address that. Some pastors go to a designated room to meet guests and invite them there. That is one way they do it. Other pastors are content with the fact that I cannot get to everybody, and I am not going to be looking at another person over my shoulder while I'm trying to speak to this one. I'm going to give this person my attention, and that goes a lot longer way than otherwise. You will have the opportunity, unless it is just a huge church, you'll have the opportunity to meet those guests, to greet those guests in the future. Give attention to the ones that God is putting in your path. I just have a way of believing that God has given you the one he needs you to speak to at that time. If you want a broader audience, you could have an area where people could come in. I'm not a big fan of it because most of the time that I've seen it, it felt more like a reception than a true informal conversation, but it can work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
I hesitated because usually Steve has a follow-up question. Steve, is there anything else you wanted to? Okay. All right, James, I see your hand raised. Go ahead, James.
Yeah. So we've, had a kind of the previous pastor and myself have typically always gone outside to the parking lot and like told visitors bye as they leave. As people leave, wave bye, say hi to them at the door. Have you seen that as effective, or are we just kind of doing something that's a little kind of crazy?
Yes.
So both.
It ain't crazy. I'm speaking tongue in cheek. It's unusual, but it's not crazy. I rarely see that, but here's the point that I would make, James. The more ways that you can show your friendliness and your informal friendliness, as such as waving, come back and all that, the better it will be. So no, I don't see it happen a lot, but I like it. I think it's a good touch. Even though I've heard you're not the nicest person in the world, I still think it can be effective at times.
Yeah.
Good. Go ahead, Josh.
So I have a follow-up question. Based on some recommendations that you gave our church, we do every Sunday a weekly meet and greet where everybody goes around and shakes all the guests' hand. We make them stand. I'm kidding. We do not do that. We do not do that because you told us not to. But what I do have a question about is specifically, what about the shyer guests that we're having a difficult time gathering their information from? Those are the ones that are slipping through our cracks at Southern Hills, and we know that there are people that are there that are visiting for the first time, and our assimilation system works if we can get people in the system. How would you go about gathering that, or should we more have a hands-off approach because we can tend to be aggressive? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the more information you can get, the better you have the opportunity to connect with them. So let's just leave that as a premise. Secondly, understand that guests, whether they're the introvert or the extrovert, they don't want to be perceived as being different than the church members. So the more you can get church members to pull out a form and start writing on it, the more likely the guests will as well. And so there are two things that are happening in churches that are getting the guest cards turned in. There are really three things. They're asking for minimalist information, name and email. Minimalist information. Tell them you can always put more, but don't give them a guest card that looks like something one of the new IRS auditors would require of us. So just a minimalist guest card. Second thing, and it may be a little bit more than name and email, but that is the minimalist. Or if they're willing to give you a cell number, but you don't always want to get that, ask for that. Second thing is you want as many of your members to fill out the card as possible. You want to train your members to do it. And so if you have a place that just says prayer requests, comments, just tell the members, hey, write me a note and tell me you were here. Write me a note and send me a joke, write me a note and give me a prayer request. And if you can have your members filling that out, that is going to make those guests more likely, whether they're looking at a piece of paper or something that is digital. And third, if you can make it an altruistic type of move, where you are donating something to a ministry for every card that is turned in. Those three things will get a lot of them. You will never get all of them. But of the churches that we're working with, Josh, those three things get the more than the churches that aren't doing them.
Have you
Awesome.
noticed oh, sorry.
No, go
I
ahead.
had a follow-up in it. Have you noticed post-COVID when it comes to some of the Shire guests as it relates to protocols that were a big deal a year or two ago? Have you seen a decrease in the need to be talking about COVID protocols? I mean, I still have people that are testing, they test themselves every week, that sort of thing. Have you noticed anything post-COVID as it relates to guests that we should be aware of?
Most certainly, whether it is the right or wrong thing to do, you'll have to be the judge. But COVID protocols are almost fading from the conversation now. I don't know if it is because everybody knows what the protocols are and they can sense it in the church, or it's because people are so weary about hearing about it. But in the churches with which we're working, I rarely hear anything about protocols. Many of them can see it because, say, instead of picking up that card, you can take a snapshot and get all the information that you want and do it digitally. There may be a little more distancing that has taken place. You see more opportunities for hand sanitizers. All of those things would indicate that the church is taking a post-COVID approach, but I don't hear the discussion nearly as much as I did even 6 to 12 months ago.
Great. Andrew, go ahead.
I want to kind of jump back to where you started talking about online and the streaming service and all that. If this was 10 years ago, sometimes you'd walk into churches and, they're shortchanging their staff when it comes to their budget. You can see some areas where they're not spending budgeted money on, but yeah, you'd walk into the auditorium and thousands of dollars in lighting and cameras and sound system and stuff like that. And sometimes we look at that and say, man, the only thing you're worried about is what that facade show looks like. We begin to recognize now post-COVID, as we all jumped online, some better than others, how important that streaming service is. But it's taken a little time to allocate that budget to it, because you still have those that see it as when you start to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on lighting, because that's the only way to really make that online stream look good. Is there any, I guess, percentage out there, or what you guys would say, man, you really got to start investing on some of these things that some people might see as a facade, because it just makes that much difference in the streaming service?
I certainly cannot give you a percentage. Certainly, I could give you percentages on facilities overall, but certainly not investing in those things that would make that Sunday morning service more appealing, clearer for both in-person and digital guests. I'll say one of the things that's happening right now is that the streaming numbers are going down, the digital numbers are going down, and it's making it even more difficult to argue for investing in equipment, lighting, et cetera, for just the digital service. You almost have to now say it's for both the digital and the in-person service. I'll still say this, I'm an advocate of the digital service because it is a first touch for guests. And that to me is as important as how many numbers and views and how many seconds people are visiting streaming as anything else. So just keep in mind as you're thinking about allocating funds, keep in mind that funnel, because that funnel starts with a basic website. And the two factors that we talked about was time of service and a physical address. But then the next part of the funnel is they're going to watch your service. And that's where you might pick up 2 guests as an illustration. If you don't have that, you may pick up 6 or 7. If you do, you won't see it in your numbers that much because it's just a handful, but that's where you're going to lose a lot of your guests if you don't have something good there. That's why I argue for the digital service now more than the counting it as an attendance number alongside in person. I know I didn't answer your question because you asked for a percentage, don't have it. How do you argue for it? I'd say the importance of it now is as much first impressions as it is an parallel service to the in-person service. Is that a good way not to answer a question, Andrew?
It really is. I'm trying to almost convince those that help allocate our funds. The fact that you've put a kind of a percentage of how many watch that online service. I find very few guests. We're getting a lot of guests right now. I find very few of them that have not seen a website or a streaming service. So everybody's heard me preach. Everybody has heard our music prior to coming on campus. And so we are right there in the middle of this, of trying to make sure we're kind of lining up with that.
Excellent. Excellent.
Good question. Who's next?
Hey, Andrew, I would just say something that we've done that's helped a little bit with that is we have really emphasized, we've asked our people that are coming in to make it known, whether it's in a video testimony or a small group, to talk about what their first experience was with the church and how it was online and not in person. That helps soften the blow a lot because we just came through a large project where we put a lot of money into that. And that helped soften the blow considerably when the average person of our church realized, okay, people really are paying attention to that.
It doesn't take a whole lot to pay attention to your digital service for it to start demonstrating how important it is. I mean, how many churches represented by you on this call today, how many of you would love to have another 5 families visit every week, regardless of the size of your church? Those are the type of implications of having a quality experience for people who are watching a streaming service before arriving. Again, it's not nearly as important as the digital count that sometimes goes alongside or combined with the in-person. It is more important for the guest experience.
I think that's so true. I try to serve with our greeters from time to time, and generally I'll ask, is this your first time here? And most all the time that it's their first time there, they'll say, well, it's my first time physically here. There's no one that's coming for the first time that has zero exposure to our church. And that's just the age that we're in. Tim, I see your hand up. You go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's a good follow-up question when you call them or talk to them after church. Do we assume they're going to come back and talk to them? I'm thinking from the pastor perspective, and also what do we train our greeters that do follow up, how to do that follow-up call?
Tim, you're really helping me here because I did not finish going down the funnel. And your question reminds me that I did not finish going down the funnel. I talked about the website. I talked about the streaming service. I talked about the first time visit. And then for me, the bottom of the guest funnel, not the total funnel, is the second visit. So I'm going to answer your question in that regard. And by the way, the accelerator in the funnel is a personal invitation. So just understand that I didn't put the personal invitation in the funnel. I just say it's the accelerator at any point. There's a big difference in communicating with a first-time guest and a second-time guest. Big difference. The communication to the first-time guest is very general, very vague. We're here. Here's my email or my text number if I can answer any question, period. If they make it back to the second time, and depending upon the demographics and the consultation we do, that number can be as high as 60 or 70%. It can be as low as 5 or 10%. So there's a wide range. That second visit becomes truly one of the persons that is interested in your church if they live in the geographic area. And that's when you begin to ask more questions. Are you interested in a small group or ministry? Is there anything specific about the church now that you visited 2 times? I keep it general and is pretty non-threatening on the first time guest. The second time guest is making a big statement. So your question has prompted me to remind myself that I did not even finish the funnel. Funnel is website, sermon, visit, second time visit, accelerated by personal invitation.
Who's next? Yeah, Tony.
You talked about greeters at the door and the importance of that. And we've really upped our game when it comes to that, but we've had some people say that they feel like it's too much at the door. So how do you balance that out where they don't feel like they're being, mobbed at the door, but at the same time they feel welcomed and that there's kind of something happening? And so we're just trying to find that balance.
Good question.
I love my church is my son Jesse's church, and I love how the welcome team does it. They actually space their greeters, and they only have one. Again, it depends on the number of entrances and the number of guests and the people coming in. That's a big factor. But theirs is a smaller church of about 200 in attendance, and they only allow one person at the door, and that person is just to open the door. So you don't feel like you're getting the greeter message right away. This is what churches do, and then they're going to forget about you once you go and sit down. So they only allow one. They space their people throughout the parking lot and in the area that people enter, a foyer, a welcome center, whatever that may be, strategically, and so that someone is not hit hard in almost an artificial way, just right at the front door. I guess that's better than the grumpy old deacon that used to hand out a bulletin and just go when you walk by. But you still got to be careful. It feels artificial if you have 5 people hit you at the door at one time.
Good question. Good thought. Who else?
We're a brand new church about to get started with our get to know you services, and we're looking at February to be our launch. We're going to be north of Dallas, the Frisco area. What would you say the priority needs to be in the funnel area for a brand new church?
No different. Now understand that the website and the sermon may not exist, but it will shortly. After the first service, it will. So put that at the top of the funnel. And here's what I tell David. I say this to pastors of churches that have been around a long time. Act like this Sunday is your first or second Sunday as a church. And if everybody would act that way, then there would be a lot of friendliness that goes on, because usually the priority of a new church is outreach and evangelism. That priority tends to fade. I'm almost on a tangent about evangelism. I know you haven't asked me anything about that, David, but I'm looking at churches, and if you look at the purposes of a church: ministry, fellowship, discipleship, evangelism, prayer, and worship, 6 purposes. Which is the one that we don't do every week consistently? Evangelism. A new church has that bent toward it. So basically what I'm saying is, what you do at the beginning, see if you can maintain that DNA as you go on, because you're going to do that naturally. You have few and you want to see more come in. Well, I hope the motive will be not merely numbers, but gospel conversations that bring people in. So whatever, I'm not telling you as much what to start on is where you start. Hang in there.
Yeah, Tim.
How long do you follow up after they they first visited, if they're not coming back consistently? When do you really drop that?
Well, the first thing that a lot of pastors don't want to even say this, but I will. If you have given them 2 or 3 follow-ups, to text, an email, maybe a phone call after their first visit, and they're not coming back, I usually tell pastors they're probably going to look somewhere else. So, anything at this point would be a little bit of overkill, if not some low level of harassment. So I would say with first-time guests, go light. Just that is the third part of the funnel, and you're really going to see the commitment take place at the second part. I would increase the contacts at the second visit, but again, not overbearing, but whatever level they are, if they're 2 or 3 things at the first visit, let's say 2, by the second visit, I may do, if they miss a Sunday or 2 after the second visit, I may do a more intentional follow-up than I would the first visit. I'm not giving you precise numbers. I'm giving you more of a principle that the second time visit really is important for more touches than the first time visit, which is counterintuitive to what most leaders hear these days.
Yeah, at the point where I tend to think of dropping them off, then like 2 months later, a lot of times they'll visit again. So I don't know, it's just confusing sometimes, what is their regular attendance and how they come. So I hate to drop somebody, but how do you?
There's a name that you call those kind of people. Have you ever read about that? They're called Baptists.
So true. Joe, I saw your hand. Go ahead. And then we'll get to Steve.
From your just talking to other churches, what are some of the more nuanced things that we say that can be confusing? You talked about a foreign language. I think you've even used in past writings, maybe even Christianese. The obvious ones are obvious. What are the ones that pastors and leaders are surprised to find out, oh, we probably shouldn't be saying that?
I don't know. I really don't know any. So many of the things I'm thinking about are the obvious and not surprises. It's fascinating. I'd like to dive into it a little bit more. Could even put it out there as a social media poll and see what happened. What are some things that you have said as a pastor to guests that you were surprised that they didn't know what it meant? So my simple answer to that, Joe, I don't know.
Thank you. I think. No, just kidding.
And I thank you for that response. I think.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just had a question. This is what I do personally here at Heritage. I've been here 2 years. Our church is, just around 150 or so people on average, give or take. And so I'm hearing what you're saying about, going light with the guest. My personality, I tend to be very aggressive with the guest.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll meet a guest in the parking lot and I'll say, hey, here's my card. Let's go to coffee. Did you fill out one of those cards? I'm going to text you this week and I'm going to meet you for coffee so that we can connect. Is that totally cool? All right, great. And then I do that and I take them to coffee. And so it's been somewhat effective, or maybe I'm feeling like now that I'm hearing you talk that maybe could that be doing more damage? I don't know. I just wanted to maybe ask because I don't want to assume.
You answered your own question. It seems like it's being effective. If it is, don't listen to Rainer. Listen to how God is working in your life. I mean, I can tell just during this interaction that you are an obnoxious extrovert. And so
I am, yes.
You're going to be the type of person that some people are just going to be comfortable with being overbearing. And so, continue to be yourself. I'm giving general principles. God has given you a personality for a reason. Don't change it just because you heard someone say otherwise.
I appreciate you saying. Thank you.
And I don't want to hear from you anymore.
Yeah, a couple of you are out of questions. If you've spoken twice, you're out. Anyone else? We got time for one more question, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up. Anyone had a burning question you've wanted to ask and you haven't yet? Go ahead, David.
I got one. It goes along with the previous question that somebody else asked. What would you say is the greatest church statistic that you've ever come across that every pastor needs to know, that you're blown away, that people ask you all the time? What's like you said, 1/3 of people who don't, without scrolling on their smartphone, you'll lose them if you don't have your physical address, and that's an alarming thing to me. That's big. What's your biggest church statistic?
I'm saying this
everybody needs to
publicly
know?
for the first time. So this is new research, and it's bigger than anything as far as an astounding, shocking statistic that we have ever done. So this is the first time only 1% of churches in North America have an ongoing evangelism emphasis. That, and it's less than 1%. It's not only 1%, it's less than 1%. We define the ongoing evangelism emphasis is that something is done to reach people with the gospel at least once a quarter. Fewer than 1% of the churches do that. Now, if I were to ask pastors, do you think preaching is important? Yeah. How often do you do it? Every week. If I were to ask pastors, do you think evangelism is important? Oh, yeah. How often do you do it? How often do you lead your church to do it? I think it is one of Satan's greatest weapons. It is the silence of the gospel. And the God gave us the local church from Acts 3, Acts 2 to Revelation 3. The whole New Testament, it's either to the local church or about the local church. And the local church is God's plan A, and he didn't give us a plan B. And evangelism is missing. Now, I understand that in the Idea Network, you have more emphasis on evangelism than you would say even the general evangelical population, not to mention the mainline or liberal population. But even in this network and beyond, evangelism is sorely missing. And right now we are on a quest, not that we have all the answers, but we're on a quest to see what God can do to change that. And we've just started doing some beta tests with churches, and we are blown away how God is changing the outward culture already. Right now, I'll be working with the Free Will Baptists, and I'm working with some non-denominational groups, and we're calling it the Hope Initiative because we got that stat and we said, we know we're not the answer. We call ourselves Church Answers, but we know we don't have all the answers. But since this data is coming back to us, what can we do to be a part of it? That is an incredible question. I didn't expect it, but I'm happy to answer it.
That's a perfect one to end on. David, thanks for asking that. Tom, thanks for answering that for us. We are out of time today. Tom, I appreciate you so much being with us, just taking time to invest into us and take our questions. That's huge. And I appreciate the content today. This will be available tomorrow for replay. Just check the Facebook page for that. We'll post the link tomorrow. Thanks for Dr. Rayner for being with us today, leading our discussion. Such practical and solid content as always. I want to talk to you briefly about what we've got coming up next. Tonight, obviously, is Idea Night at the different sites that you're at. Take some pictures with guys, post it, tag the Idea Network so that we can see what you guys are doing on stories and where you're at all over the country. Next week, we are going to have Mark Miller with us. There's the promo for Mark. Mark is the VP at Chick-fil-A of High Performance Leadership. I don't know Mark personally, but Mark did a podcast that I was listening to probably a month or two ago. And as he was sharing at the very end, when they're doing ads and they're like wrapping stuff up, he shared his cell number and said, if you're ever interested, if I can be a help to you, reach out to me. And so I was like, wow. So I texted him, just told him, who I am, what we do. And he said, I'd love to be a part of it. He's going to be with us next week. And he's the VP of High Performance Leadership at Chick-fil-A. He's actually going to be a little bit late to our talk. So that gives us some time next week to kind of share some testimonials, things that we get from Idea Night. So you'll have a chance to share a little bit next week at the beginning of the call. And then we'll cut to a conversation that we're going to have with Mark Miller. Same format as this week. He's going to give a talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to have Q&A with him. So make sure that you don't miss that next week. Special thanks again to Dr. Rayner for being with us. Thanks to all of you for joining us live today, and we'll see you next time. You guys have a great week thinking outside the box. Take care.